Welcome. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and today we are going to present you with truths from the original ancient, very old Assyrian Aramaic or Aramaic scriptures, the book of Breetah in the Aramaic or Genesis in English, of the language that God spoke to Adam and Eve in the garden, and the men at the Tower of Babel spoke that one language before God scattered them and gave them multiple languages, of the original ancient very old Tav Asheret, which is the sister language of the original ancient very old Tav Avri or Hotep, or the original ancient very old Hebrew. This is a long dead language or old tongue that no one speaks today, obviously because it's gone the way of the dodo. It's totally dead. It's like Latin, Norse, or Germanic, Middle English, etc. Nobody speaks it anymore. But translator Victor N. Alexander, a native-born Syrian, he's from Bet Narin or Mesopotamia in Syria, now living in America, got hold of these original Old Testament scriptures, and also the Galilean Aramaic New Testament scriptures from a high priest of the Church of the original Church of the East, the Apostolic Orthodox Catholic Assyrian Church of the East, who had hidden them and preserved them for over 2,000 years. They hid them from the Roman Emperor Constantine and the Roman Catholic Church in that day, because Constantine wanted to totally wipe them out, and also from Mohammedanism, or Mohammedans, today's Islam, who just really wanted their land. So he's found a way, using the root words of the modern vernacular, supposedly, to translate that long dead old tongue into the nearest English equivalent, while staying faithful to what those scriptures actually say. Sometimes the words in the Aramaic have no English meaning. There's no translation for them. So he has to run around and find a word that fits. Okay. For example, Milta, there's no equivalent in English. So he had to search around, and the closest thing to it was the manifestation, which Christ is, the manifestation of God, and God is the embodiment of that manifestation, and so forth. So we're going to clear up some bogus claims. Okay, we've covered this in our other videos on our channel. Christians coming to you and saying God did all in a literal 6-day week. He finished part of creation in a literal day, 24-hour cycle. Incorrect, because in that original Assyrian Aramaic, Nishana Atika Sapraya of the Tav Asheret, it is translated into the nearest English equivalent as the first eon, not day, or not the day that we in the West have come to understand. It's not a literal day, because in that original language, in the Breetah that Victor N. Alexander translated in English, it actually states Genesis 1:5, literal Aramaic word Euma, which means eon, immeasurable period, age, or day with a capital D, because they're using the Creator's calendar of Genesis of Breetah, or Genesis 14, where God said, "Let there be suns," or two lights in the sky of heaven, so as to choose between the day and the night, that they should serve for signs and wonders, seasons and cycles, and for years. Okay. So he created two great celestial bodies, the greater one to have authority over the day, and the smaller one to have authority over the night. And he created the stars and all the celestial bodies, and so forth. These were for signs and wonders, seasons and cycles, and for years, and obviously days when they came about. So there was nobody there, that's why it's translated, it's put into the footnotes, that is an immeasurable period or unfathomable period, as we found another Western translator had actually put, because no man was created at that time who could recount, God started at 6 in the morning and he finished at 6 at night, and it took him 6 days. Okay? So it's an immeasurable period, age or day. So don't let people fool you and say it was a literal 6-day week. And God rested on the 7th day, the day as we know it. That's why it has a capital D. It's a very different. The Hebrew day, in the day of Jesus and the apostles, etc., was a very different day. It was a kind of complicated, kind of weird. It's hard to get your head around. Even we get confused, right, when we're trying to explain it. So we cleared up that one. As it says here, Genesis 2, and God stopped working in the 6th eon of his creation, and he rested in the 7th eon, or era, eon, immeasurable period, from all the work of creation. Okay, so he blessed the 7th eon and made it holy because he rested in it from all his works of creation that he performed, so he didn't have to create anymore. Okay, and there's a difference here. Christians will come at you and say, oh, there's only Adam and Eve, and then they had sons, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, and that's it. Okay, and then later on they had more sons and daughters. But when Cain and Abel were around, they were the only two. Unless, looking at this Breetah, translated into English, Breetah or Genesis 1:27, and God created the human being to resemble, to look like his own visage, right? Visage means face. He created them, two or more, male and female, so two different genders, right? So this is a pre-Adamic being. Okay? And he blesses them, tells them, go multiply and increase, procreate, whatever, and so forth. Not giving you this to eat and all this sort of stuff. And that was the evening and the morning of the 6th eon, or era, or age. Not a literal day. And in the footnotes, it has here 128 literal Aramaic idiom. God created the Aboriginal man, meaning like an indigenous man. We're not talking about Australian Aborigines. He's using that term in regard to indigenous, the Neanderthal man. So that's a pre-Adamic being before Adam. In Genesis 2:7 it says, and the Lord God moulded, or he formed, Adam, or man, or many men, from the dust to resemble himself. So they were made in his image. They looked like God, right? They resembled God, but from the dust, from the dirt, from the earth. And he blew on their faces the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. So he went from an inanimate soul, a lifeless soul, to an animate or a living soul. It was moving around, active, possibly spoke Lishana Atika, whatever language at the time, right? And they walked around the Garden of Eden. So that clears that up. There's two different beings made. Okay? And yes, they were vegetarians, they weren't vegans. They probably ate a lot of fruit, herbs, vegetables, plants. Okay? And as it says here, Genesis 1:30, and it gives you all the creatures of the wilderness, all the birds of the sky, and everything that walks on the earth as a living soul, and all the herds as a source for food. A source for food. And it was so. And here in the footnotes, predominantly as a source for food, seldom to be sacrificed or eaten, only when God required it. As in the sacrifice of Cain, which God was well pleased. Abel, of which was God was well pleased, and Cain brought him fruit and vegetables and stuff which he wasn't so happy with, because he knew the right sacrifice to bring, but he decided to do otherwise. So there's two human beings, or beings created. The Neanderthal man, who has his animal instinct, he doesn't have the Spirit of God, and the second Adam, in this case, we're not talking about Christ, who's the first Adam, right, supposedly, according to Scripture. We're talking about these two human beings. He's a spiritual being that came to dwell amongst men in a physical form, the manifestation of God, right? So we're not talking about him, we're talking about actual human beings, or beings. And so there's two there, pre-Adamics, the Neanderthal man, and then there's the human being who later becomes the hominoid, etc. And God stopped working in the 6th eon of creation and rested in the 7th eon from all the work of creation. We'll cover that. Yeah. So there's a difference there. There's like in here, God creates all those creatures, presents them to Adam to see what he would call them. Yeah, and then Adam or Adams, because obviously in this translation he's made more than one. Because here it says, and he blew on their faces the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. Yeah. So if they had two faces, it would be understandable, but it's only one being, it's a few beings that he's created, and he blows on their faces the breath of life, and Adam becomes a living soul. They become a living soul. The difference between the Neanderthal man and this Adam is that the Neanderthal had his animal instincts. He didn't have the Spirit of God in him, so he didn't have that presence with God, etc., as Adam and Eve did, and Cain and Abel at the time. But Adam to Abel had that Spirit of God in them, so that's why they're in the presence of God. They could communicate with him, talk with him, etc., etc. The Neanderthal or pre-Adamic Adam just followed his natural animal instincts, and then they were ousted, or they moved to the east, and then Adam and Eve, because of their sin, they got kicked out of paradise and they moved to the east, and Cain kills Abel, so he gets out of the presence of God, chucked out of the presence of God, or ousted into the land of Nod, which is in the east. So everybody's going to the east, right? So this particular hominoid woman, supposedly made from the rib of this Adam, because he had all the animals, he named them all, but sadly it's like, oh, I don't have a companion for me. So God says, well, it's not good for a man to be alone, especially if there's all these other men, right, beside him that were created. So he creates this companion for him, this woman, which happens to be a feminine man. If you study the anatomy, the biology, etc., etc., you'll come to realise that. Okay, so in these scriptures, it doesn't say that in the meantime Adam and Eve had 10,000 other kids, right? It doesn't mention that until after Cain is ousted and goes into the land of Nod toward the east, that Adam and Eve get together again, right? Have another child, a replacement, because Cain killed Abel, and his name was Seth, because God gave her another offspring in place of Abel, who was killed by Cain. And to Seth also was born a son, and he called his name Enosh. Thereafter, Enosh and his descendants were called after the name of the Lord. Thereafter they were called after the name of the Lord. 4:26, Breetah 4:26, or Genesis 4:26, the beginning of the line of the children of the Lord, who in later chapters, we'll have a look at Genesis 9:12, or Genesis 10, a bit further up. Oh yeah, Genesis 9, verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his children, and told them multiply and increase in full the earth. Okay, so that's his 3 sons with their 3 wives. And he gives them some commandments. And if you do this, well, here's some payment, some punishment. Where we look here for this. In Genesis 11, verse 1, and the whole earth was one language, and everyone spoke the same dialect. Possibly the Lishana Artika Saprea. And then they all met in the east, and they found an empty spot in the land of Sumer, and they settled there, or Shina. And where's that? In Assyria, desert region in Assyria. So they started building a ziggurat, a high tower, trying to reach the heavens, thinking possibly that they could invade it and take over or something like that. They said, let us again build ourselves a city and a ziggurat with its head in the sky, and let us call ourselves by a name. Further up in Genesis 6, I think it was, or 9, Cain, in the land of wandering Nod, creates a village, and he named it after his son Enosh. Enoch. We can go back and have a look at that. See if we can find it again. Okay, we can go further. Yeah, Cain took a wife, so no, he didn't marry one of his sisters, didn't take her along with him. He found a wife or a woman in the land of Nod, land of the nomads, east of Eden, and she gave birth to Enoch. And Cain started a village and called it after his son Enoch. And then he had more sons, and so forth. And that's when Adam and Eve got together again, and Eve brought forth a son called Seth, who then had a son called Enosh, and then they all were called after the name of the Lord, the beginning of the line of the children of the Lord, or the holy line that Christ would have came through, but was meant to come through. But in Genesis 11, or Breetah 11, the whole earth was one language, spoke the same dialect at the tower, etc. Right? And the Lord came down to see the city and the ziggurat that humanity had built. So he came down from the heavens. No one probably noticed. And he said, look, the people are one people, and there's one language for all of them, and this is what they thought of doing from now on. They will not be at a loss to do whatever they imagine. Let us go down there and divide the languages, so that the men will not listen to their companions' tongue, or their language. They won't understand each other anymore. And the Lord scattered them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city, or the tower, and the city. That is why its name is called Babylon, because it was there that the Lord made the languages of all the earth sound like babbling. And from there the Lord spread them all over the earth, he scattered them. But what it means by that is not he didn't scatter them so they ended up in the Hawaiian Islands, or the Pacific, Fiji, Samoa and New Zealand. That's a load of rubbish. What it means is he spread them in that, across that area, right? Maybe the earth was all one until the shifting of the plates, or maybe it was different, yeah, because you see the what we call it, the rivers coming out of Eden that watered all the garden. They went into 4 heads, or 4 tributaries, right? They split into 4: Gihon, Pishon, the Euphrates, and the Tigris. Right? So maybe the shapes, the plates and all that had shifted prior to that, and that's why you got these different seas and lakes and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so here's the history, all these descendants. Okay, and down here it says, and Eber, or Shilah's line after the birth of Eber. Okay, we'll get up here, a bit further up here. Genesis 11:14. And Shelah lived 30, and to him was born Eber, or Eber, sometimes spelled Heber in your modern Americanized Bible versions. And Shelah's line after the birth, it's his lineage, after the birth of Eber, was 403 years. That's how long his lineage lasted for. It wasn't how long he lived for. And to him were born many sons and daughters. He had many descendants, right? And Eber lived 34 years, and to him was born Peleg. It's Peleg, not Pegleg. And Eber's line after Peleg was born lasted 430 years, and to him were born many sons and daughters, and so forth. So this person here, Eber, keep an eye on this one, or Heber, is the old forefather, ancestor of the Hebrews. Notice here there's no mention of Israelites, no mention of Jacob yet, so they weren't Hebrew Israelites. Okay, and then here comes Adam through Nahor and Terah's line. Terah lived 75 years, and to him were born Abraham, Nahor and Haran. Haran died, his brother died when they moved. Yeah, and the age of Terah was 205 years. So they did probably lived a long time. Maybe they had shorter years, 10 months in a year or less. And Terah died in Haran. That's still or Chaldean, right? Okay, so they moved because this is where he was born, Ur of the Chaldees, which is in Mesopotamia, not Western Africa or Egypt or anywhere like that. Okay. So keep an eye on this guy, Eber or Heber, because Genesis 12 or Breetah 12, Lord finally tells Abraham, "Go from your land, from where you were born, and from the house of your father to the land that I will show you, and I shall make you a great nation, and I shall bless you, and I shall make great your name and blessing." So here it's not saying because they went to the land of Canaan, right? Abraham passed over the land until he came to the land of Shechem and up to the chestnut of Moreh, and the Canaanites still live there. And there's a bunch of people there, Canaanites living there. And the Lord revealed it to Abraham, and told him, "To your offspring I will give this land." He built an altar for the Lord there. He built an altar for the Lord there where this was revealed to him, meaning his descendants. It's not talking about 20, 30 centuries later, where Christians say, "Oh, we're his descendants," or that sort of stuff. It's not talking about. It's talking about the immediate offspring, right? To your offspring, your children, I will give this land. So he builds an altar. And from there, Abraham departed for the mountain east of Beth-el, not Beth-el, because this is the proper name of God. El, not El. El is it's been scripted wrong. The scribes scripted it wrong, because they went to Canaan, and the Canaanites were worshipping El. Okay, go and Google it, and you'll find that El as a pagan god. It's like a gold statue picture there, a picture of this gold statue. Okay, that's what they were worshipping, and somewhere along the way they picked it up, they adopted it as part of their belief system, right? So Abraham departs for the mountain, Beth-el, which is house of God, or God's house, right? Beth is always house. I'm pretty sure that's what that is in Hebrew. Beth is house. And then he pitched his tent with Beth-el to the west and Ai from the east, and he built an altar for the Lord there, and he called on the name of the Lord. Okay, El, right? And Abraham took up and left together with his bearers and he himself. Okay, so up here, somewhere, oh here we go, in Genesis 10 footnotes, it's indicating that 1021 literal Aramaic idiom or expression, 1021, and to Shem, Japheth's great brother, there was also born children. He became the father of all the children of passage. Take note of that. Okay. And then he had some children who were the Elamites, the Asherai, the Arpachshadai, the Lotians, and the Arameans. Okay. That's the people that came from them. From Shem, Shem's brother. And to Shem, Japheth's great brother, must be his older brother, born these children, right? So it's the Asherite or the Assyrians, the Arameans, those who spoke the Aramaic, okay, and these other ones here. And to Arpachshad was born Shelah, and to Shelah was born Eber. Footnote here, 1021 literal Aramaic idiom, the Hebrews. Okay, so you had the Chaldeans, then you had the Hebrews, Chaldeans or Mesopotamians, because they dwelt in Mesopotamia, Syria, or Syria at the time. And then you had the Hebrews, so Chaldeans and the Hebrews. No Israelites. There's no Israelites mentioned there. So all these silly persons that say, oh yeah, the Israelites were the Canaanites and all this sort of stuff, wrong. The original scriptures don't say that yet. Okay, it has no mention of Israelites. That's later on when Jacob comes on the scene and God decides, okay, got a new name now, you shall be Israel, etc., etc. Okay, that's a few chapters away. No mention of Israelites here, no mention of them being Canaanites, none of that garbage. 1024, literal Aramaic name, Hebrew, comes from this name. Take note, Hebrew Israelites, etc., etc. Our word, this is in the ancient Aramaic, to cross over. Someone who crosses over, implying passage. So what it's talking about is when Eber possibly got with Abraham, right? And they all migrated to Canaan, because that's the modern Israel now, right? Because they were God's chosen people, were the children of God, so they go into this new land, milk and honey, plenty, etc., right? All the things they need, the blessed land, whatever. It's supposed to be a holy region. Okay, so you got these Canaanites in there worshipping these idols, right? These golden idols or whatever, El, Baal, whatever. So eventually they got to get pushed out or kicked out. So that whole land promised to Abraham will be that land for the chosen, the holy, right? The holy people of God. The Jews, etc., okay, who later on are identified as his chosen nation, the house of Israel, the Israelites, when he liberates them from their oppressors in Egypt, according to the scriptures. Okay, no Israelites yet. It says here Aramaic name, literal Aramaic name, Hebrew, comes from this name, Awer, to cross over, someone who crosses over, implying passage. It doesn't mean Israelites. So you can't have Hebrew Israelites. It's two different peoples, even though they came together and merged together eventually, right? If they did that according to scripture, there's two different factions. So you can't go around saying you're a Hebrew Israelite. Okay? It doesn't gel. It's like oil and water. It doesn't gel at this point. Okay? And then there's the Tower of Babel. Everyone spoke the one language. And here's the descendants of these people that were scattered from building that ziggurat or that tower. These are the descendants of Shem. To Shem, who lived 100 years, was born Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. So it's possibly going back over what we've already covered in Genesis 9. And then here comes Eber, right? Or Heber, ancient forefather of the Hebrews. And then along comes Abraham and his two brothers, born from Terah in Ur of Chaldea. And here's the descendants of Terah. Terah was born Abram, etc., etc., and then to Haran, his nephew Lot. And Haran lived during the lifetime of Terah, his father, in the land where he was born, Ur of the Chaldees. So they haven't migrated yet. Abraham and Nahor consecrated for themselves women, etc., etc. And they went out from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. So between Eber or Heber and Abraham, there was this migration to the land of Canaan. So it doesn't tell you here that suddenly Eber or Heber went to Canaan. Okay. It just tells you here that Abraham was told by God to pick up his stuff, his wives, etc., etc., and get out of Ur of the Chaldees and go to the land of Canaan. But they went as far as Haran and settled there. They stayed there because it's probably a great distance, right? So they lived there for a while, and then his father, by the looks of it, Terah, died in Haran. Okay, so it's probably named after one of his sons, the son here. Okay. And then Haran had a son called Lot, which was Abraham's nephew. And the funny thing we found later on is that Abraham marries Sarai, or Sarah. Okay, and then he had his wife, etc. But what we're interested in here is that Abraham had a wife called Sarah, and he goes to Egypt, and he says, "Oh, she's so beautiful," and they'll kill him and take his wife, right? Whatever. There's in the scriptures that he said, "Oh, I suggest you tell them that you're my sister." Okay, and it leads up to in scripture that he actually says, "Well, you actually are. You're my half sister." Okay, so put that. They won't go around your head and try to understand that one. Okay, so she was his half sister. He said, "Yes, indeed, you actually are my sister." That's half sister. It's kind of weird, but these kind of things happen in those days. You're not making excuses for them, but these kind of things happen, like incest, intermarriage, same family sort of thing. Okay, they didn't really think much of it until they were told. Maybe through God, through the Spirit. I think you better cut that out. Okay. Like people get the father drunk, and they got their children. Like Lot takes his 2 daughters out of Sodom because maybe their husbands were the ones that said, yeah, Sodom's not going to get destroyed. You're dreaming, mate. You're dreaming, And they stayed there, and then they died. All those people there, Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah. So these poor females had no mate. They had no male. There's no male in that area. No males in that area where their father took them. Yeah. To dwell. So they got them drunk, slept with them, and they had children. The Moabites, apparently. Maybe because of that union or that deception, while the father was drunk, that's why the Moabites became, if it's scriptural, not very nice, they became bloodthirsty or whatever, sinful or whatever they were supposedly renowned for. Okay, so that's basically that. Here it is here. There was famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to live there because the famine consumed the land. Not too sure where he was at that time. East of Bethel, to the western Ai from the east, etc. So he's in the land of Canaan, right? So the famine happens there. So they go down to Egypt to get some food and all that sort of stuff. But he realises, Sarah is really beautiful, right? They might get hold of her, kill him, and just take her anyway. Okay, so he was treated well because of her. He was given flocks and bulls, donkeys and servants, maidservants, husbands, and camels. So he got quite wealthy off that trickery, right? That deceit. And the Lord struck the Pharaoh and all his household with great plagues because Sarai was the wife of Adam. Well, that seems a bit unfair. They didn't know. But maybe it's a warning to them, a sign to them, revelation to them, right? And the Pharaoh called Abraham and told him, "What is this that you did to me? Why did you not reveal to me that this was your wife? And why did you say, 'This is my sister,' and offer her to me for a wife? Behold, now fetch your wife and leave." Okay, and the Pharaoh commanded his men to send him and his wife away together with everything he had. Maybe that's God's plan, right? That's the way he became wealthy. Okay, because if you haven't hardly anything and you go into a new land, well, you're going to struggle, aren't you? So he blesses them in that sort of way, gives them all these things that the Egyptians had. They think, "Oh, geez, damn, we better make some recompense. Here you go. Here's a whole lot of oxen. Here's a whole lot of clothing and all that sort of stuff. Food, whatever you want. We're so shameful. Now get out of here. Oh yeah, we're so ashamed." Something like that, right? Yeah. So, and it continues like that in Genesis chapter 13 or 14 or something like that. It does it again, right? The Pharaoh or king, whoever is about to marry her, and he finds out in the dream, "Oh geez, that's someone else's wife. Cut it out. Don't do that." God tells him whatever, right? So he approaches Abraham, says, "What the hell? I nearly married her, all this sort of stuff. Get out of here, but on your way out, here's a whole lot of cattle, goats, clothing, food, all the things that he'd need." So he became quite wealthy like that, and then he supposedly went into that land of Canaan. Okay, so he had plenty before he went into the land of plenty. Yeah, so that clears that up. And there seems to be a lot of, say, Hebrew Israelites, etc., saying, it all began in Africa, Kush, etc., all this sort of stuff. But there seems to be a problem, because on this old supposed biblical map, ancient maps, here's Kush here, up in Mesopotamian area, right, the land of Nod, around that area, Assyria, Iran, okay. There's Sumer, where they built the tower. There's the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Gihon, the Pishon, right, all these rivers. So the Garden of Eden is somewhere here, not West Africa, not in Egypt, okay, all that sort of thing, right. There's the land of Canaan, which is today's modern Israel. So Abraham, Eva, etc., leave Ur of Chaldee and migrate over here, which today is modern Israel. But Israel is trying to gain all that area and trying to push the Palestinian Arabs out. Okay, here's Africa. Western Africa is way over here somewhere. So this area here would probably be the east, right? Okay. This is the west up here, Greece, etc. Yeah, ancient Egypt, Kemet. So it all began here, according to the scriptures. Yeah. You can't say it began here when all the details in the scriptures are here. The four heads of the rivers, the four river heads, tributaries, Pishon, Gihon, the Euphrates, and the Tigris in Assyria. Okay, so that clears that up. We'll just have a look at another map, because we asked, was Ethiopia was Kush in Ethiopia? No, as we showed, the land of Kush was in Iran. Yeah, maybe we think we came across a verse that says God will rescue his people from Kush, from etc., etc. So maybe these people migrated to Africa, right? Eventually they went this way, right? But we found that sometimes this is spelled Kush, as in this Kush. Sometimes it's spelled as Kush, right? So the scriptures say that the Garden of Eden, the rivers, flowed around the land of Kush. So do you think that the river went all the way over here and all the way to West Africa or somewhere and watered that area? No, that's thousands and thousands of miles away. And here's the proof, or the evidence, that the four rivers were around in this area. So they flowed around this land here. Havilah, Kush, Mesopotamia, like Ashur, and so forth. So there's the evidence there. So if anyone tells you it all started in Kemet, they may have come to Kemet, adopted their language, from the Egyptians, etc., etc., because they were traders. People came in from the sea and everywhere and traded with them. So they might have adopted and adapted someone else's language to make theirs better or something like that, and so forth. And they may have been influenced. They may have been influenced by some of the Egyptian stories, or the other way around. You have to do your personal research on all that sort of stuff to verify that, rather than say, "Oh, it all started in Africa. We're the original Jews. We're the original Israelites," or this sort of stuff. Where we verified through those Aramaic scriptures that the Israelites aren't on the scene yet. Okay. So if anyone tells you that they were, and that they were the Hebrew Israelites, or the Israelites that originated in Canaan, wrong, because the Canaanites were there and they were pagans before the Hebrews got there, before Eva and Abraham migrated there, and probably eventually booted them out, got them out, right? So it become that Holy Land, which is supposedly today's modern Israel. Okay, so it's all there. We brought it to you. the ministry of the real truth. Okay, it's all there. What we're stating, so we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. You can read it for yourself. If we go slow here, yeah, it's all here. We're not here to, like we just said, pull the wool over your eyes, deceive you. We are the ministry of the real truth, and we have honesty as our best policy. We strive to stick to that, live by that. We're into old chivalry, where a man's honour is worded as honour, so he should honour it by being honourable, etc. Now the people will recognise that, say, oh wow. Okay. We are human, we do make mistakes from time to time, but remember the old Willie Shakespeare speech, quote, to err is human, but to forgive is divine. Okay, so if we make a mistake, sometimes you don't notice that, that proves we're human, and we've figured it out, oh, we said the wrong thing, we better change it, or make amends for it, we'll do it. If you kindly bring it to us, we'll credit you. Okay? Which is only fair, isn't it? Okay, so it's all here. No indication that Adam and Eve had children on the side, as Abel and Cain were talking and all that sort of stuff. That Gnostic pseudepigraphic book, pseudepigrapher that says Cain and Abel were born, and they had two girls attached to their legs. Okay, Cain loved Abel's one, so I've got to have it, right? Lusted after her, so he killed Abel to have it, right? This pseudepigrapher meaning that they can identify to the nearest year when that particular Gnostic book or pseudepigrapher book was written, right? But they can't determine who the actual author was, so it's usually considered fraudulent. Sometimes not so much fake, but just someone else writing in the style of somebody else. Yeah. Supposedly the council at Nicaea left those kind of books out because they thought, nah, these are pseudepigraphic. They're not good enough to put in the canon, right? In the Bible we have today. Okay. So eventually these line of God, these that were called after the name of the Lord, right? El, they saw that the daughters of men were hot, so they married whoever they wanted. Okay, and these probably were not so ugly Neanderthal women, right? If they were pretty, or some sort of attraction to them, right? So they left their rightful place. Not aliens from outer space, or little green men, or the devil and his 13 cohorts, right? Because in Scripture it actually tells you that those that have fallen are at the four corners of the earth in chains. They're in the underworld, in prison until released for a certain period or something like that, right? Check it out. Okay, so they decided to get with these Neanderthal women, the woman of men, the unholy line, right? These animalistics, these pre-Adamics, Neanderthals, and from them came hybrids. So they would have been like giants, freaks, strange-looking beings, creatures, or whatever, because of the close, probably genetic proximity, right? Both being human, beings in origin, right? Just had different traits, characteristics, etc., etc. So that could be the problem there. Okay. And then they just started getting out of hand. They were sinning, doing what they wanted to do, because they could, and they would, because they could. And there's only Noah and his 3 sons and their 3 wives who were probably pregnant, or pregnant after they came out of the ark, and Noah's wife, that were like righteous, right? Nobody else on the earth, the planet, was righteous. Enoch apparently walked off somewhere. He was transported somewhere else by God, according to these scriptures. Some say, Gnostic books or whatever, God took him in a chariot, in a flying chariot, and all this sort of stuff. He never died, all that sort of stuff. That could be pseudepigraphic. It could be in the New Testament, Peter or something like that, saying Enoch, blah blah blah, he didn't die, he was taken by God. It doesn't actually say that he was in Genesis or Breetah that he was taken up in a chariot by God, fiery chariot, all that sort of stuff. it does hint that he was transported to somewhere else. Okay. Maybe he was taken up by God, that's probably what it means, or he was moved further afield, some other land, where this regional flood didn't affect him, right, and so forth. So if you like this particular video, I'm going to end it there. Subscribe to us, give us a like, add your comments down below, then share it with all your family, friends and others, and watch out for our next exciting video upload.